is Linda, and I am so pleased to introduce our podcast guest this week, and it's Peter Heller. And Peter has been doing capital campaigns way much longer than he looks like he's old enough to have done, but probably at least as long as I have, maybe even more, it seems. So we're going to talk mainly about capital campaigns today because that's Peter's real expertise. So Peter, I wanted to kind of start because a lot of people think about a capital campaign. Well, everybody else is doing a capital campaign, so we should do one. But how does an organization really know it's ready for a capital campaign?
It's a great question, Linda, and thank you again for inviting me to join you for this conversation. So, at the Heller Fundraising Group, we believe a capital campaign should only happen if there's an urgent and pressing need. It doesn't mean that your roof has to be leaking, although frankly, a lot of times it's that your roof is leaking, but that you can't do a capital campaign for a nice to have. It has to be a have to have.
That's a great way
And,
of putting it.
yeah, and then when that's the case, the money you need to a capital campaign should only happen if there's a it doesn't always have to be in the form of a capital campaign, and we're obviously going to get into what that looks like. But it's just that this thing that's called a capital campaign that's I can't remember exactly when it's been around, maybe since the 1940s or something. I can't remember the history off the top of my head, but it's a really useful structure just for getting everybody's attention in your organization and your donors and your board to focus on this need. And it still works after all these years.
Right. Do you find that most capital campaigns are for capital built bricks and mortar projects, or do you do some that are for endowment building or other purposes?
Yeah. So there's generally three main buckets that capital campaigns fall into. Now, okay, so what are those buckets? Building projects, meaning either a new building in addition to your building, a new location, or renovations and upgrades to your building. That's one. The second is programmatic expansion and growth. And the third is endowment growth. Now, some people will only call it a quote capital campaign if it's that first one, if it's for the building. We tend to call it a capital campaign for any of those because it's just putting together a bunch of capital for a need that's above your annual operating expenses. And that's really the key point. It's like it's funding that's above your normal operating expenses. Um, I'm going to give you one caveat, which is something that's called a comprehensive campaign. Could call it a comprehensive capital campaign, CCC. I don't know, whatever you want. But a comprehensive campaign is when you look at a period of years, let's just say for argument's sake, 5 years, and you're going to raise money over that period. Every dollar that comes in that's philanthropic is going to be counted towards that campaign. And the reason you do that sometimes is that it can be hard for some organizations, depending on what they're raising the money for, to differentiate between the project that's part of the campaign and the rest of their fundraising. And I'm getting into the weeds here, but that's what we're here to talk about. So let me give you a specific thought or example. Um, if you are increasing programmatic support, let's say you're a we did this once for a science museum for children. It's like the programmatic support that's it's a certain they wanted money for a certain part of their for their exhibits and for what they did, but it was really hard to explain that as separate from the rest of the the fundraising and the programmatic activities that they did in the organization so that we put together a comprehensive campaign. And the very simple way to do it is like, how much do you raise as a baseline every year over 5 years? Let's say, just for argument's sake, let's say it's $1 million a year. So that's $5 million over 5 years. You're not really getting anywhere if you just have a $5 million campaign. But if, for instance, you had a $10 million campaign, you're gonna you're gonna raise the 5 million you normally use over there, and you're gonna add $5 million, which would be for in this particular case for added programming. And the concept is you can then go to every donor and tell a more inclusive, holistic story.
That's a great explanation. I, I've done a number of capital campaigns myself, but probably a lot of our listeners maybe are even thinking about a campaign or have never done one. But what are some of the red flags that you look at for before you give the green light to go ahead with a campaign? I know, I'm sure you've had many clients that you've had to say you're not ready. So, what are some of the
Right.
key things that you're looking for?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to break this down, and I want to put a plug in for people to visit our website, which is hellerfundraisinggroup.com.
Okay,
And
we'll be able
there's
to
a couple
pull that
reasons.
link.
Yeah, and they'll have the link here. So there's a couple reasons to look at the website. One is there are some free tools that are helpful for some of these processes that you can download. And also, um, there's a few pages that explain our view of capital campaigns. And um, we look at and break down capital campaigns into 6 elements. And when we talk to a nonprofit about their potential campaign, we're always thinking about those 6 elements and how ready are they? And I'm going to tell you what they are in just a moment, but how ready are they in terms of each of those elements? And no one is ever 100% ready, no matter how like, fancy or snazzy your organization is or whatever, well funded. You're never 100% ready, which is why you need folks like us to help you. And so, what are those 6 things? And once I say them, I think, at some point we should talk about what a feasibility study is. Um, but so those 6 things are: number one is the dollar goal of your campaign. Number two is the case for support or story you're going to tell about why this campaign matters, which has to be compelling and urgent in some way. Again, not doesn't have to be the roof is falling in, but urgent. Number three is the committee or of people who are going to help run this campaign or the leadership of the campaign. Number four is a very, very obvious one. You guessed it, prospects and donors. You can't have a campaign without them. So where are you at with that? Number five is your staffing and systems. And number six is the timing. Now, there's a lot behind each one of those. And in fact, also, if you go to our website, there is under, I think, free tools, there's a videos button, and we have a video specifically about those 6 steps and what each one of them means. Because just, should I give you a couple for instances?
Sure.
Okay. So we might start talking with a nonprofit who has um, here's a great example. They have a strong need to renovate some of their space. This happens with all sorts of nonprofits. We work with schools. We work pretty much with across the board, schools, social service organizations. We work with a lot of synagogues, um, et cetera, et cetera. So an organization that has a strong need to renovate space because of, there's not enough need. I'm sorry, there's not enough room, or there are mechanical issues, or indeed the roof is actually leaking. But they don't yet know anything about the costs or the timing because they haven't talked to any architectural firms to get a sense of that. Um, we're not going to start helping them with a campaign until they have an initial sense of that. And it doesn't mean that they have to have a full-fledged architectural plan and everything. That's a little maybe too advanced, but they need to know, is this $1 million project? Is this a $20 million project? What do we think, and a lot of times you start talking to an architect, you get two or three options. So it's like, oh, if we could raise all the money that we want, we could do the $20 million version. But if we can't, we need to scale it down. And that's what we help people figure out. So that's an example. And then just one more example having to do with prospects and donors. Um, we just did a feasibility study for a workforce development organization in New York City that's helping to train people in the food industry uh, to get jobs in New York City. And amazing organization. They do great work, and most of their funding has been coming from foundation donors. Nothing wrong with that. That's amazing. And at the same time, most of the time, foundations are not going to be your main donors for a campaign. It's just the way it is. They might contribute a bit, but typically individual donors with wealth are going to be your main campaign donors. So this particular workforce development organization did not have a robust list of individual donors. So we worked with them on figuring out who your donors might be. And in fact, one of the big recommendations from our feasibility study was before you launch your campaign, you need to spend 6 to 12 months developing your donor relationships.
That's a good examples that you've given, and you've mentioned feasibility studies several times. So for those who don't know what a feasibility study is, do you want to kind of give us a summary of what all is involved in a feasibility study and why it's important to get those those six criteria that you mentioned to really get your ducks in a row before you just jump out and launch a campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few things about this. The first is, feasibility study is a turn of phrase that uh, fundraising consultants for campaigns use. Architects use it. It's used in a variety of fields. So it's simply spending some time analyzing and planning before you do the thing. And the thing in this case is a campaign. Sometimes we call it a planning study because people are like, look, there's no way we're not going to raise the money for this. We just need to know the parameters of what we can do. And we're like, fine, call it whatever you like. So, if you think about, I'm going to back this up a little bit. If you think about the word campaign in the English language, it's used just really in a handful of situations. It's used as we're using it now in nonprofit fundraising. It's used in marketing, like marketing campaign. It's used in politics, political campaign. It's used in military campaign. I don't like, maybe it's used somewhere else, but those are the main uses. Each one of those things, you would be really dumb not to do a lot of planning before you launched the thing. So keep your head on your shoulders when you're in the nonprofit world and do the same thing before you launch a campaign and do some planning. Now, uh, we've been doing this, like my company's 20 years old. We've been doing this for a long time. We're really good at it. There's others who are really good at it too. Um, we happen to think there are factors that differentiate us, but so does everybody. Um, and if anybody's on this and they want to talk to us about their nonprofit campaign and whether a feasibility study is needed, I'm happy to talk to you about that and help you figure it out. So what happens in a feasibility study? What happens is that we look at those six elements: dollar goal, the case, the committee and leadership, the prospects and donors, staffing and systems, and the timing. We look at and analyze all of those, help the nonprofit get conversant in uh, how a campaign works, and help get each of those things set up or analyzed as best as possible so that when it's time to launch the campaign, it's going to work well and make sense. So um, when we do a feasibility study, it's usually a 5 month period, occasionally four, occasionally longer, but 5 month period usually. And we are writing their case for support, analyzing their donor list. We happen to use donor search. There's other databases out there, but we look at their donors. We do a lot of talking about who their donors are. Also, we work with their staff and board leadership. Um, One funny thing, Linda, that I don't know if you've come across this, but no matter how much planning the nonprofit has done for how much they need to raise, there's always some confusion on their part on exactly how much so needs to be raised, and we help them translate that amount into like sort of donor campaign speak. So it's very simple. You can have like if you're doing a building project and it had lines of lines on a spreadsheet, we condense it into a few specific things to make it easy to understand. So we spend about 5 months working on that, writing the case for support. And then in the last month, typically we're going to be interviewing anywhere from 25 to sometimes 50 donors one-on-one to take that case for support, put it in front of them, talks about the project and the dollar goal, and ask what they think. Because, we can come up with the greatest ideas, but we need to test it in the marketplace.
That testing is really critical. Um, the other thing that I think is, and you've kind of alluded to leadership a couple times, and I have always found when I was actively doing capital campaigns that I used to always say when I made presentations on this that if I lined up all my campaigns from the most successful to what I would call the least successful, and then I lined up the campaign leadership from what I think was the best down to the worst, and I think we've probably all had some of those. They would match up identically. I think campaign leadership is so critical. So can you tell us a little bit about who should be on a campaign committee or cabinet or whatever you choose to call it, and why each of those roles are important? What are you looking for leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, let's talk about the fact that there's both staff and volunteers. And volunteers can be board members or non-board members. Sometimes it's a prominent donor or a prominent community member, or somebody who's got some skin in the game about this who may not be on your board. And staff is usually your CEO or executive director and development staff. Then, of course, like if we're working with a religious organization like a synagogue or a church, we've got the clergy are an important voice as well. We have to figure out how to manage all of those components. And there are, of course, nonprofits that are not big enough to have a development director that that's as long as they can dedicate staff to making the project work, it's fine. I mean, weird. For instance, right now we're working on Martha's Vineyard with an organization that's in Massachusetts. Um, it's really hard to find housing on Martha's Vineyard because of, it's that way in a lot of hot vacation spots, but particularly you're on an island and it's kind of people are getting shut out. So they have a fabulous executive director at this organization. She's doing all the soliciting for the $16 million campaign because they can't find a development director.
Hmm.
She's doing a great job, but it's a lot of work. So, uh, when you're putting together volunteers to help run campaign and campaign leadership. Um, we typically have what we call a campaign committee. Some people call it a cabinet. Doesn't really matter what you call it. We like to have not a huge number of people, but enough people so that there's work that can be done and there's influence. So, for instance, let's just say 15 people, for argument's sake. Two of those people are going to be the co-chairs of the campaign. Uh, we like to make sure there's some staff on that. So, the development director, we don't want them off to the side, like in a chair in the back of the conference room or the side of the Zoom or whatever. We want them to feel like they're a genuine full-fledged participant um, in the conversation. So, um, usually the executive director is involved, but it depends on the organization with how much they're chiming in. There's some nuances, like you don't want to go too far without getting that person's buy-in because you're just not going to have a successful campaign if they're completely hands off. Um, and then also you need to think like, what is that committee actually going to be doing? Okay, so one of the things we do is um, as as we help the nonprofit recruit people for this committee, we present a job description. So the people who are going to join know, like, hey, you want to be on my capital campaign committee? Okay, sure. And then nobody describes what they're going to be doing. Like, you want to be on my committee, and like, here's what we expect. That's a more reasonable uh, way to have the conversation. And the things there's basically like three things. One is an obvious one is to help solicit funds for the campaign. Not everybody on the committee actually has to do that. If they can and it's easy, great, but we need, maybe three people or four people on the committee to be involved in that, depending on the construct of the organization. Um, we want Very importantly, we want to expand the thinking and the ownership of this project so that it's not just like an executive director and a development director sitting in their offices like, hey, we're going to raise $20 million dollars. And that executive director I mentioned on Martha's Vineyard, she has an amazing board and campaign committee that are supporting her in this work. And then she's got us to support her. And so, it's like she's doing a lot of it, but they're also doing some of the soliciting and they're meeting regularly to discuss the progress and to brainstorm on ideas. Um, so soliciting, kind of holding the understanding of what the project is. And then also, depending on the organization, there's a lot of functions beyond just asking for money that have to happen. Um, Campaign policies. What period of years are you going to accept pledges for? Who's going to approve and sign off on written pledge agreements when people make commitments? Um, how are you going to determine whether there are naming opportunities and how you do those? Um, are there going to be events? Are there going to be communications? All that sort of stuff. You can either do that internally or you can have do it internally with a member of the committee kind of running a subcommittee on campaign communications, campaign events, and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. It, I think the whole concept of the feasibility study, just some people maybe they don't quite understand how important that is in the process. Can you give us, without naming the organizations, but could you give us a couple examples of things that you found in a feasibility study that really helped set direction for the campaign, or maybe advise them that they're not ready for a campaign? Can you give us a few examples of what
Yeah,
kind of things
absolutely.
might be surfaced?
Yeah, so first, I'm going to again direct people to our website and our blog, where a number of years ago, I wrote a blog called Is Your Feasibility Study Terrible? And it used examples, not naming organizations or other consulting firms, about feasibility studies that were awful and the reasons. And just one example is like, the study says, yes, you can raise $60 million dollars for this landmark building in Manhattan in New York City, but it didn't give any data on any particular donors who were going to give any particular gifts. That is key. And so a couple things about how a feasibility study lines an organization up for a successful campaign. So recently, we did a study. This was, Linda, probably the most bizarre example, but it doesn't have an ending yet because we're actually right now in the process of setting them up for the campaign, but it has a good outcome. So we were approached by an organization for a program-based campaign. So this wasn't a building, it wasn't an endowment, it was not an endowment, not a building. It was to expand programming for the tune of $20 million dollars for the youth component of their international human rights work. Very important stuff. And we put together all those things we just talked about, analyzing the six elements, and our team went out to, I can't remember how many, let's say 30 donors and asked them, took a draft of a case for support, asked them what they thought of this. And by and large, everybody said, I don't get it. How is this going to work as a youth thing? And how does it fit into the rest of the organization and all that sort of stuff? So we came back to them and we said, and this is where this was kind of like a different from what we've done in the past. We said, like, we don't think you should run this campaign, but we think you should actually run a much larger, comprehensive campaign where you talk about all the things going on in the organization and roll the youth into it and present a much bolder, bigger goal that makes more sense to your donors. And so we're actually in the process right at this moment of helping them launch a $200 million campaign.
Wow, that's
So
fantastic.
that's because if it is a lot, it sounds like a lot, but they raise at least $30 million a year. So if you take 30 times five, that's 150 million, and you
Right.
add 50 million on top of it, you have a nice chunk of money to do more programmatic work.
I know I found that many times when I did studies too, that people weren't thinking big enough. They get scared and intimidated by a larger number, but oftentimes the community and the donors are saying, no, we want to do more. And so I think that's a really important thing. Have you ever had to, I'm sure you have, had to tell people you're not ready for a campaign at all? And then what do they do and what do you suggest they do to get ready for the
Yeah.
campaign?
Yeah. So, first, let me say that it's rare that any nonprofit is 100% ready for a campaign, uh, that they have all of those six things really in tip-top shape. So there's usually, like most of the time after the feasibility study, they can start the campaign. But that doesn't mean that they're going, full steam ahead with a what we'd call like a public launch like the next day. There's usually a quiet period where they're testing the waters with their most significant donors. Um, Sometimes somebody knows they have a really large donor, but that donor, before you can go talk to them, you need to get some other gifts so that donor has confidence. So there's always a variety of metrics. Um, and sometimes we say you're not ready. However, um, we used to say that more because we've gotten a lot better at only helping people start feasibility studies if we feel there's a road forward. And in fact, I think since, gosh, I can't remember when, but in the last several years, almost every feasibility study we've done leads to a campaign because we're very careful about planning that. And sometimes, yes, I remember years ago there was a study we did for a music school, and everybody loved the school, loved the executive director, and they were like, nah, I don't think this project is important. So it's like they had to go back to the drawing board to figure out how to explain and make this, I think it was a renovation and expansion project to make it relevant to their community.
I think that's a good point about studies that sometimes people think, well, why did we spend all this money to do a study? They might tell us we're not ready for the campaign, but the help that they get from you to get ready for the campaign is so certainly well worth the price of a study, in my opinion. Have
Yeah.
you ever had a case like that where you told somebody that they weren't ready for a campaign, and what did you recommend to help them get ready?
Yeah. So, um, we look at a feasibility study as a logical step towards a campaign or towards strengthening your organization, regardless. It's not like it takes you down one path and it's a detour towards it's an important step towards your future. And you know, if you've got a proactive leadership and development office or development person, you can take that information and strengthen what you're doing regardless. So uh, I referred earlier to this New York City workforce organization.
Mhm.
Um, we came back and we told them you need to spend 6 to 9 months, or I can't remember. I think maybe up to 12 months building your donor connections because they had the names in their database. They had connections. There's some very well connected people in New York City, but they need to foster those connections and build them before they can go say, hey, how about $1 million for this? Um, so those are what I would call kind of like interim steps that, what you need to do before you can launch, but they're steps that are strengthening things.
One of the things that, if in case there's any CEOs listening to this or board members, um, I think the role of leadership, not only the volunteer leadership, but the internal leadership, your board and your staff, um, how how much time should they be prepared to really put into a capital campaign?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. So first of all, it's going to require time from the CEO or executive director. It's going to require time from the development director. These are things you can't ignore. And that hardworking executive director on Martha's Vineyard, like she's doing it. She's finding the way because she understands that raising this money is not a nice to have, it's a have to have for the future of her organization. So when you get that, you're going to figure out how to find the time and delegate other things. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. That's now often additional development staff will be needed during a campaign, which the cost of that gets wrapped into a campaign budget. I'm not saying it's simple like poof, I can find the money for that, but you need to put those calculations in there. It's not sometimes it's simply a like development assistant level position to help with the managing data and other things like that. And but sometimes it's like I need a senior solicitor who's going to go out there and raise money. In terms of the volunteer folks, you part of what we help people do in our feasibility studies is map out the metrics of how much activity is needed to get this campaign done, and then is there enough, when I said one of those six things, it's staffing and systems. Is there enough staff and volunteer support to get it done? And if not, how are we going to find volunteers who have the time to do this? Um, some people have worked, years as a board member or whatever on soliciting to make things like this happen. We have to be realistic. If you've got a job or a life situation where you don't have the time, we can't find the time in somebody's life who doesn't have it. So we have to find the people who've got the time. And one more thing about that, Linda, and I know we need to wrap up soon. So, a volunteer so if you're a board member listening to this, for instance, a volunteer board member who's got enough time to, let's say, come to a committee meeting once a month and then participate in 2 solicitation meetings a month, that person is going to be able to make a big difference. Because if you think about that, it's like 2 meetings a month. That's like maybe every other week. You spend time an hour having a meeting with somebody either on Zoom or in person. Of course, there's the preparation for that and the after meeting, thanking the person and debriefing with the staff. But 2 meetings a month, if you're doing that for the organization, you're having 24 meetings in a year. That's a lot of impact.
Mhm. It is, it certainly is. I, as you said, I want to, there's two big questions I want to ask you before we wrap up. One is, can you tell us again without naming names, but what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen in capital campaigns so people know what not to do?
Oh, okay. So my favorite mistake is um, you start the uh, the architectural and design project process and you start the campaign and you get really excited about the actual building that's going to happen or the renovations that are going to happen and maybe you're a school and you're like, oh my God, we got to open it for the next term of and you let the building project get ahead of the money you've raised and you get into financial trouble because you don't have the money yet in the bank and your building project is proceeding and then there's urgency uh, and so that's one big mistake. Happens all the time. What's another one? So asking somebody too soon. What do I mean by that? We don't want to dilly-dally and delay on asks, but you need to open people's minds up to this project, even if there's somebody who you know really well and who has been a donor. This is a new thing. You're hopefully going to ask them for a transformational level gift. And we didn't talk about the nuances of getting people to get really excited about this, but you want a big, big gift if possible, whatever that means for this person. It doesn't happen if you send them an email or you just you know, you get together for coffee and you're like, hey, so, we've known each other for a long time. Now we've got this project. How about $1 million? Usually doesn't happen that way.
Certainly not. The one big question that I was kind of saving to the end because this is one of my favorite topics is I have always said that campaigns are great because they enable you to build a new building or renovate your building or expand your programs or whatever. But I've always thought that one of the biggest residual effects of a capital campaign that is the most valuable is the fact that it strengthens you for your ongoing fundraising. And I don't know how you feel about that, but how do you see, when a campaign wraps up, that people don't just take all that great information they've had and those great volunteers they've had and the new systems they put in place and just forget about them and say, well, that was just for the campaign. Do you feel that um, a capital campaign can help strengthen the organization moving forward and how?
Oh, absolutely. So that is the secret to a successful capital campaign, right? It's on the one hand, you've raised $1 million, $25 million, whatever the amount is, to do the things that you wanted to do, which are really important things. That's huge. That's really important. But then don't turn the volume down. Okay. So not just on the connections with your donors who you need to steward and demonstrate the impact of this campaign to, but all the aspects of your nonprofit that have been more closely knitted together by virtue of working on this project together. That keep that going and you're golden.
Absolutely. I think, you've really shed a lot of wisdom with the people. I know we could probably go on for a couple more hours, but I don't think people want to listen to us for a couple more hours, but I could listen to you all day, I think. But I do think you're absolutely right. Don't don't let your capital campaign be the end of all your efforts to improve your organization. I think that's
Yeah, that's a good message.
really valuable. Well, I'm going to certainly thank you for your time. It went by so quickly. I can't believe we've wrapped up already. But I want to thank you for the time. And as I said earlier, we'll be giving people your links to your website, and they can. It sounds like you have some great material on that website that will help them know
Yeah,
if they're ready
yeah,
for a campaign. So.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk with you. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and um, hopefully you'll all take a look at Peter's website, and if you're even considering a capital campaign, or just thinking, oh, I don't know, could we, can we do this or not? Call Peter, and he'll help you out with that. So thanks again, Peter, for
You're
your
very
help,
welcome.
and look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Okay, be well.